Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to today's Chief Learning Officer webinar. My name is Alec, and I'm going to be here today to help answer any of your general or technical questions. Before we get started, I'm going to cover a couple things you need to know about the session today. There's no dial-in number for attendees, so all audio for you will be streamed through your computer speakers or headphones, so please adjust your volume there accordingly. You can submit questions for today's speaker or any technical questions that may arise by clicking on the Q&A icon located on the right-hand side of your screen, labeled here with this top arrow. Just click that icon, type in your question, click submit. If it's content related, we may pull it during the Q&A session if time allows. And if it's a technical question, I'll have an answer for you that will appear on your screen shortly after you submit. So right now, you can download a PDF of the slide deck by clicking on the handouts icon on the right-hand side of your screen, labeled here with this bottom arrow. Click there and you should be able to pull down a PDF to follow along with the slides today. Today's webinar is being recorded. You're going to receive a link to that recording in a follow-up email, so please keep your eyes open for that. That will come from an email called HCM Events. In that same email, you're going to receive your HRCI and SHRM certification credit information and another link to download the PDF of the slides after this webinar is over. So today we have a great speaker with us, as you can see him there on your screen. Sebastian Lemieux is the director at StratX. He's been a key player in large-scale corporate transformation projects, helping clients achieve greater market focus and develop their marketing capabilities. And he's also involved in developing and implementing e-learning platforms for different clients, including US-based telecommunications and IT companies. So it's our pleasure to have Sebastian with us. So with that being said, Sebastian, let's get started.
All right, very good. Well, thank you very much, Alec, and thank you very much, everybody, for joining me today. I am talking to you from beautiful Boston. We have the home opener of the Red Sox today, so very excited about that. So go Red Sox, but very excited about the topic today, experiential learning for business impact. So thank you again. What I'm going to try to do is give you some information here. I'll cover a little bit of what it is that I'm going to talk about. And then I'll try to do this within about 40 minutes to try to give about 20 minutes for Q&A at the end. Okay, so I think we should get started, and I'm going to click here on the slide, and I should be able to advance. Perfect. So what we will cover today, really what we want to talk about is how experiential learning works and really the impact for organization, because it is an important element for business growth. So from the work that we've been doing here for the past 30 years, we've seen different topics, different purposes. Business growth is really ultimately what a lot of companies want. So how do you drive that leadership development, and how experiential learning can help do that? So first, we'll talk a little bit about what is experiential learning. Some people have some different definitions. Then we'll see why use experiential learning. I'll give you a couple of examples as well, and a couple of things, a couple of elements here. What are the benefits of using experiential learning? And maybe yourself, you are about to embark on creating an experiential learning initiative. Maybe you've been tasked with growing the leaders in your company at different levels or for different functions. So I'll give you a couple of examples, and hopefully that'll be food for thought for you as you're creating these initiatives, these programs, and maybe you can pick out a few things here and there. And then at the end, I will finish with some best practices. So again, trying to wrap up and try to give you a couple of tidbits here and there, and a couple of things that hopefully you can use and apply. And again, food for thought as you go about creating some of these programs. So, shall we get started? I think we shall. So first is, what is experiential learning? What it is that we're talking about here? So there's a lot of theory around it. I'm going to keep it very simple. Really, experiential learning is learning by doing, and it is based on four main elements that operate into a continuous cycle. So I'll come back to that in a minute. So it has been used in ancient civilizations. I'll spare you all the historical anecdotes and all of that. It's used in adult learning quite a bit. It is also used now a lot in child development theories. So it's about exploring. It's about making mistakes. It's about experimenting, and it's really about learning by yourself. So the idea through experiential learning is that you acquire new skills in a safe environment. So you may remember as a child, one of the things that your parents may have told you is don't touch the hot stove because it's hot, you'll get burned. Well, that's how you learn, but maybe if you actually touch it, then you may learn faster. And I keep telling my 4- and 5-year-old that, but if they experience it, they remember. So it's kind of the same idea here. So, what we're trying to do as well here is reflect real-world situations, and what we'll talk about as well is the fact that experiential learning helps sort of shorten that time frame of learning. So you get your leaders faster on that scale of learning the different capabilities that you're trying to build over time. So that cycle is fairly simple here. It's experience, reflection, conceptualization, and then experimentation. I'll get it out. So as I mentioned, it is a continuous cycle, and the idea is that it should be iterative. That means that you don't just do it once, you do it over time and do it over. And the idea as well, and what I think we've seen, is that it can fit different learning styles. People learn differently. So, some people learn by watching, some people learn by thinking, by doing, by feeling. Through these experiences that you can create in a business environment, you can really fit those different ways of learning. So, experience, which is the top one up here, is obviously probably the best way to learn, but a lot of times it can be very costly and it takes a lot of time, right? It's kind of like pushing somebody and saying sink or swim, and sometimes they sink and sometimes they swim, so that can be costly if they don't do so well for the organization as well as for themselves, for their career. And so a simpler way to look at this cycle as well is just very simple. So experience is do it. You do the thing, the skills that you're trying to master. Reflection is what happened. What is it that happened? What are some of the lessons that we can take? Conceptual is the so what? What does that mean? And then the experiment is then do it again. Do it next time, and how will you do it different next time? So that's really those 4 elements, and again, you continue to do that time over time. So again, it's about acquiring new skills, and what you can build here as well is an emotional reaction, really a way of learning. We see that through some of these experiences, people remember the experience. They remember, we usually use a competitive element as well. I'll talk about that more. And people remember. People remember when they did well, when they won. People may remember as well, even more when they didn't do so well. So, there's a lot of theory behind it as well around the best way to learn is to fail. So here you talk about and you experience these things and you learn by failing here. Okay, and then experiential learning is not static, right? So what we're seeing is that experiential learning is entering a new era that is driven by a lot of different factors, a lot of different trends. So technologies, new modalities, new ways of working, everything is digital. The new generation that's coming in the workforce, the Generation Y or the millennials or whatever the latest one is, they're used to having that digital learning, more individualized. This typical classroom and sort of the typical 9 to 5 working hours week is just something of the past. So what experiential learning allows you to do is to have that self-paced as well, and really include a big trend as well that we see a lot in learning development, which is gamification. So going beyond the badge or something like that, and really bring that idea of game, that idea of competition, but linking it to the real world as well. So I'll talk more about that in a minute as well. Okay. So hopefully that kind of frames things a little bit here without too much of the sort of deep theory behind it. And I think now we have a time for a poll, so a bit of an audience participation for you out there. So what I'd like you to do, Alec, is start the first poll. And thank you very much. The question here is, in your organization, I'd like to know which audience is the most in need of leadership development training. What are you tasked with? What are you working on right now? So is it first-time managers? Is it mid-career? Or is it more of the sort of directors, VP, C-suite type of audience? So I think Alec will give a couple of minutes here. And we'll see if you're working on a specific audience. Ooh, the results are in already. Okay. So it looks like about 57% is saying first-time managers. About 22% is more on the directors, VP, and C-suite, and about 21% mid-career. So first-time manager seems to be really the audience that you guys are looking at. So that's good. So we'll see here and see how we can, and I have to click on the slide again here. So that first one is really the one that more than 50% of you said. So we'll see, if we can give you some examples here as well and generate some ideas. So before I give you some cases, the next question would be sort of why use experiential learning? And some of you may be familiar with this traditional approach that you see here on the screen of sort of, how you create learning and how you create training. 70% from on-the-job experiences, 20% from constructive peer interaction. Notice the word constructive. That's an important classification here. And then 10% from the training courses and reading. So that's kind of the theory and sort of the traditional way of looking at training. What experiential learning allows you to do is really to sort of shorten that and integrate the different elements. So within that sort of 10% or that traditional training, you integrate on-the-job experiences and you integrate peer feedback as well, because you can have different teams and different people interact here during the experiential learning experience. So it's really about bridging the different elements here. And when you think about the traditional ways of learning, which can be cases, it can be readings, it can be lectures, it can be PowerPoint, or, as sometimes we see death by PowerPoint, really having that experiential and that interaction for a lot of different audiences can be very good. So, the peer interaction here can be also coaching and mentoring. We can integrate that into the program as well. I'll mention that a bit more later. And then on the job, sometimes you also stretch people. If I go back to kind of the sink and swim, you can have people that are stretched, and in the real world, in the experiential learning initiative, the simulation, the scenario that you set up, you can also have a stretch objective as well. So if you want to do that, and if you want to kind of get people ready for the next level of leadership, that's something that you can do as well. Okay. So what are some of the benefits of experiential learning? That's sort of the next thing. So we kind of look at 5 big ones. And the first one here is going to be around risk-free real-world application. So really what we see is that enterprise-wide kind of learning, participant personally experiences concepts hands-on in a controlled risk-free environment, right? So no one loses real money. There's no really impact. It's all about the learning. And as I mentioned, you can really calibrate the scenario and make it difficult or make it easy for people, depending on the level of audience that you're trying to build here. The second one is about motivation. And here the idea is that experiential learning can really engage and motivate participants more compellingly than other forms of learning. So that's that whole element of gamification, and especially when you have an online experience, we see that in traditional e-learning, we see a lot of drop-off. People start the program but may not continue, may not follow up. And so whether you have synchronous or asynchronous pieces, with experiential learning, people want to know. They want to come back. They want to learn. They want to know how they did it. It's that competitive element that really builds it. The third element is around teamwork. Well, you can do some experiential learning as an individual basis, but a lot of the time we see that the benefit is really in that teamwork, in that conversation that happens, and really participants develop their skills together. And here again, I'll mention in a couple of minutes different examples of how we've seen teamwork and that done very well. The fourth one is around creativity. Participants can seek their own solutions to the challenges. So whereas you will have, if you do a case study, you'll have sort of at the end the answer of what sort of the company did, and that might be something that, that you can talk about. Here, participants come up, the teams come up with their own answers, and they can have some traditional ways of thinking and approaching the problems, or you can, here again, stretch and push them and drive them and have innovation here and kind of integrate that there. So that's sort of the creative part. And the fifth one, really a big benefit, it's fun. It really is a different way of learning. It tickles the brain in a traditional way, in a way that traditional training does not. It's a competitive element, really. And a lot of the leaders that we see, whether it's at the first line leaders or whether it's at the high level leaders, they're very competitive, right? So it's hard to put people away. Sometimes at the end of the day, people want to know and continue to play the game, and they want to know how they did. And we have to say, you got to take a break. You got to, go get some food and relax and etc. But it's really fun. People want to have it and want to know exactly how they did. So that's kind of the five big benefits of experiential learning that we see. And now I think I have another poll. And so that's going to be, we talked about sort of different levels of leaders and audiences that you're trying to find, that you're trying to train. What is now the capability that you're trying to build? So I have a couple here. So Alec, if you want to queue up the next poll. So that says, for your organization, what is the most important capability to grow over the next, let's say, 12 to 18 months? Is it critical thinking? Is it business acumen? Is it emotional intelligence? Is it leading innovation? Or is it coaching? I'll give you a couple of minutes here to think about sort of which one it is. They might actually be one that should say, it's a mix, or it's all of the above. So I think you're still voting. Sorry. Okay, so we got quite a bit of different answers here. So leading innovation is first, about 21%. And then, no, I'm sorry, coaching is actually first, 37%. Then leading innovation is second. Emotional intelligence is third, about 18%. Then we have critical thinking, 15%, and business acumen at about 10%. There's actually, in CLO magazine I saw recently, from this month, actually, a couple of, one article that's very interesting about sort of the different trends and the different topics that people are looking at. So the reason why I was asking this question is trying to see sort of what are the capabilities. And the question then behind is sort of what are the skills that are helped by here that you can help develop through experiential learning? And the answer is kind of all of the above. You can sort of mix and match here. And this is, I'm going to start here before giving you actual examples here of experiential learning work that we've seen. It's really about combining what you see here that some people call the hard skills. So customer centricity, strategic thinking, business acumen, innovation, and then the soft skills on the other side, such as communication, coaching, team effectiveness, collaboration. There might be also other soft skills as well, such as mentoring, giving feedback, self-awareness. When you combine those two skills together and you have a combination of those, that's really how you can really bring leadership development and those two sides of the brain, someone could say, to really be able, and through those experiential learning experiences, you can really help drive that. So, that's what we've seen. Maybe what I'm going to do here is kind of give you some examples. So I'll talk to you through three different cases, three different examples of work that we've seen here. And as you can see here, we've worked all over the world. I'm talking to you here from Boston, as I mentioned, but we have our head office in Europe in Paris, and we've covered all of the countries that you see here in red on the globe. And so what we've been able to see is really looking at building, leadership developments in a couple of different ways. So the first example that I'll take you through, and I'll put a picture here on the screen, and so I'll give you the story behind the picture in a few moments. So this program is actually a cross-functional program for high potential. This is one of the 3-day sort of face-to-face kind of traditional way here, where you would have 5 teams of about 4 or 5 people facing each other. And we built this with a company that's a B2B company with about $15 billion annually of revenues, but very different business units. So some of them very traditional B2B, some of them a bit more B2C-ish, if you will, and it's cross-functional as well. And really, there's 3 innovative things here that we've seen that we've used. So one is each team has a coach. So this is really a great way to blend those hard and soft skills. While people are making the decisions in this fictitious environment, they have a business. They go to market. They have different products. They have to look at the market. They have to look at customers. The company is providing actual coaches, and so it's extra investments, obviously. So you have the 5 extra people, 1 coach per team, that is able to observe the teams as they make their decisions. And they're using the leadership competency model that company has developed, which is a mix of hard and soft skills. And so what the coach is able to do is they do not participate in the experience, which is actually sometimes a bit difficult, but they just take notes and see what happens in the organization. And so at the end of each round, we have 5 simulated rounds here over the 3 days. They have a time for feedback with a team. And so it's a great opportunity to get feedback right there. And if you remember the circle that I talked about earlier on, it's a great opportunity to talk about what happened, what went well, what didn't do so well. And then because they're doing 5 simulated rounds, you're able to say what it is that we're going to do differently next time. So that's really very strong. Obviously, not everybody is able to do that. I'm sure you would like your organization to be able to provide that. And also you have to be able to have people that can bring this kind of constructive feedback, as we saw here, as well as a coach. But that can be really, really strong. So another element that's very simple as well that we're doing, a second innovation for this program, is on the last day, for an hour, we have what we call a peer feedback. And that's very simply an hour where individuals have a chance in the same team to give feedback to each other. So it's a little bit like speed dating for business. So you have 10 minutes per pair, 5 minutes I give you feedback, 5 minutes I receive feedback. And again, we use the competency model that the company has, mix of hard and soft skills, and it's really well received. People appreciate being able to get feedback from their peers, from the same level of people, to say, how did I do well? How did did I ask the right question? Or what can I do to do better in the future? And then the third and final innovation here, a bit of a tidbit, is we actually switched the teams. So just like the real world, where executives are plucked from one business, from one group, one team, people that they've built relationship with, that they know how to work with, and are put next day, next month into a different business, different markets, different go-to-market strategies, different competition sets, etc. But you have to be able to work in those different instances. And so here in this simulated environment, about 3/4 in, we switch people. So we rotate and take 2 people from each team and rotate them. And that's really great learning. Again, from a hard skill perspective about what was the strategy in your team, how did you develop the thinking there, why did you do this, why did you have that pricing, etc. But also about the soft skills. How do you integrate the new people in the team? And then for the people that stay in the team, how is it that they can explain what happens? So sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good, but it's really very good as well. So that's kind of the 3 things. I'll finish here with explaining the story of the picture here. So I told you I would tell you what's the picture of. So some of you may know this is actually called an Inukshuk. So it's a stone it's a stone statue kind of, and as you can see, it's in a cold country. So this is actually an Inuit word, and it was used in northern Canada and northern parts of Europe for a long time. This was used to mark, a path, and people used it as a way to navigate. So especially, in snowy places where you don't really have a lot of ways to find out, people would build this so that people going behind them would know that some of their people have gone through this before, but also it's also a visual reminder of sort of the path and the experiences that people go through. And I actually have one of them here, a little version right here. So what we do at the end of this program is we actually give just this little inokshok to every participant, and the idea is that they put it on their desk back at work, so that they are reminded by this little token, this little thing of the experience and the leadership experience that they've done through over the past 3 days with the team. So that's kind of the idea there. Okay, so that was one example. Hopefully, again, that kind of gave you some ideas. I'm going to go now to a second one, and I'll bring another graphic up here, which is around blue ocean strategy. So some of you may be familiar with this international bestseller. It's about 10 years old now, so we've worked with the authors of the book. They are professors at INSEAD Business School, and there's actually a new version of the book around blue ocean leadership that came out last year. That's really interesting. So if you don't know about it, I strongly encourage you to go check it out. The idea behind blue ocean and the metaphor, as you can see, is that you've got the sharks that are competing against each other. And so in a traditional market, that's what's going on. You get more market share, you get 5% here or 1% more, and it's the water gets bloody because there's just the competition. And what, as a business, you can try to do is, or you should try to do, is really get to that blue ocean and that uncontested market space, as the authors call it. And so you're trying to get away from the competition and redefine the market. And they have a lot of examples as well. Cirque du Soleil being one of them in the circus industry that's been phenomenal success. And around leadership, that's also a way of sort of setting you apart. So here I'm using this as an example. This example of this leadership development was an innovation program. So it was a session for about 90 top leaders of a pharma company. It's actually a division of a pharma company that's about $5 billion. And the whole objective was to foster innovative thinking. Pharma traditionally, as well as medical device, can be a bit of a risk-averse industry. So people recognize that. This was for the top leaders of this division. And what we were able to do here is really look at learning first and then applying right away. So the good thing, the beauty of this blue ocean strategy is that there's a lot of processes and methodologies and tools that come with the book. So people can learn by just reading the book, and you can tell people just go read the book or go read the summary of the book. But if you have a simulation, if you have an interactive experiential learning component, you really get over a day or a day and a half a team exercise where people apply and understand the concepts. And then right away, for a day or so, you also have the application. So people are then able to say, how can I apply these learnings? And that, when you look at ROI and when you look at the impact of your training program, that can be very strong here. So another thing that was good as well is that this was cross-functional as well with different functions. Some of these teams were external-facing, customer-facing teams, so commercial teams, marketing or sales. Some of them were also internal-facing, so IT, HR, and legal, and really that worked quite well. People were able to apply that, and so if you build that in, if you have sort of learning through the experience and then the application, that can be very strong. And some people have, some comments were the fact that the simulation was extremely effective in bringing blue ocean concepts to life, providing a real-time feedback as well. So that's sort of the second example. Okay, So, if you will indulge me, I have one last example here, and I think before we do that, though, I just an example, something that you know can attest for the effectiveness here. This is a post. I know it's very hard to see, but it's a LinkedIn post, and you can see actually the team down at the bottom around the computer, which kind of gives you an idea of sort of the setup, what it looks like. But people really remember, and you know they're able to post on social media, on LinkedIn here about their experiences. So that's a good team exercise as well. Okay, so the last example here that I have for you is around growth, and so this last example is a growth program. This company really is focusing on growing faster than the market. And what this experience is, it's actually 4 modules of 1 week each. So this program is 4 modules every couple of months, and there's about 2 months in between each module, so it's over a year. This is for, as well, a B2B company, and this is for a key group of about 300 leaders in an organization of 70,000 employees. And so we have this 1-week program. And what we were able to do here and really built in the impact right away. So again, when talking about ROI, and if that's something that is on your mind, and people, your business partner on the business side is going to tell you, we want a return on investment, we want impact of the training programs. Here you're able to build in. So over a week, and I know a week is a long time, but we were able to use the planning process. And in the morning, you apply the planning process through the simulation environment, through this business case. And then in the afternoon, each person is going to take that piece of the process and apply it to their real-world portfolio. So the team is going to work on that for the whole week, and then each person, the product is rotated every week. So you're able really to understand the concept by doing it in the simulation, and then you apply it right away each afternoon. On Friday of that week, then it culminates in a presentation to upper management right there, where the team has a chance to present that piece of the planning process for the week. Meanwhile, in between each module, the other people on the team are going to work and present as well to their managers the piece of the process that they've worked on. So you will then have all those plans built up for the real-world portfolio of all the participants. So you kind of build in the results in there. And at the end, and by the way, we rotate these programs. We do them in Europe, we do them in North America, and we do them in Asia as well. And they bring in those people together from all those different continents for each of the programs, as we also learn about the different ways of doing business around the world. So at the end of the 4 weeks, the 4 modules, so that's about a year, there is a graduation, so you do kind of get the idea of, okay, we've completed the traditional training part, but then what we do is that 1 year later, we then look at how did the person do? What did the portfolio of products do? Did it grow? And it's really about revenues and profits as well. So there's a bunch of KPIs that we can look at, but ultimately, that's a way that, that has been used and that can really drive that leadership training there. And some of the comments there was about, situations being very real and a great way to test out strategies and learn how decisions may work in the real life. So those were just a couple of examples here. Hopefully, some food for thoughts for you. Some simple things, and or some maybe some broad picture as hopefully you can find some ideas here as you're embarking on creating your own leadership development programs. Okay, so I've covered quite a bit. It's about 34 past the hour, so I will sort of summarize in the next few minutes here and kind of give you some final best practices. Again, as sort of you think about how you would do this for your own company, and kind of summarize things here. So the first one is going to be about cross-functional teams. As I mentioned, we really look at cross-functional teams to have more dynamic and diverse results. And actually, cross-functional is one thing, but really what I think works best is cross-everything, cross-geography, cross-experiences, cross levels, cross genders. If you mix and match the teams as much as possible, this is how really you've got a really strong way to develop those hard and soft skills of leadership, and we've seen that done very well. The second one is around encouraging active involvement. So, by default, the experiential aspect makes it more interactive. And really, you don't need to do, as a facilitator, too much there. But, one simple thing as well that you can do is about the rules of effective teams. So maybe at the beginning of the session, we ask people to take just 10 minutes, because we know they're going to do group work. Take 10 minutes to think about their past group work experience, maybe a good one, maybe a not so good one, whether it's in the real, in the workplace, or whether it was a learning experience as well in school or what have you. And then what worked well, what didn't do well. So that's a good way of sort of encouraging the team to kind of set up the different rules of effective teams. You can call them the golden rules of team effectiveness. That doesn't take long, but sort of what it is that the teams will do, what they won't do, and sort of how that's going to work over the sort of the experience. So that's the second one. The third one is around reflecting on the experience. And so again, if you remember the cycle here and the circle around sort of that reflection, you can't just go from doing to doing it again. You have to reflect. You have to kind of debrief. You need to provide the opportunity for participants to reflect on their experience. So one of the other ways that we can do that is sometimes that we do an analyst call. So especially on the sort of harder skills of leadership, that enables the teams to be able to pretend that they're analysts, or that they're presenting to analysts, and explain about their strategies, about their numbers, about what happened, things that they may have changed. But also they have to communicate that to the analysts and kind of give them a confidence in the team. So that's also helped them with some of the softer skills as well. And really, so that's kind of a sort of organized way of having that reflection piece. We do a lot more around mindfulness as well recently as well. A lot of people are talking about that. So whether it's in the morning, when you're fresh, whether it's in the lunchtime, or whether it's later on, being able to have time for people to reflect is something that's important. So that's the third one. The fourth one is going to be about relevance. You have to have the experience that's relevant to the participants' challenges and learning objectives. So it has to speak to people. You have to know your target audience. You have to know your objectives. You can't just create something that's might be fun or might be sort of out of the blue. It has to speak to them. And again, that's kind of building in the impact right there. Then you have the bridge between the fictitious world to the real life. So as I mentioned in a couple of examples here, sort of how you have that impact, how you create that ROI, you can build that into your scenario. So for example, in the pharma world, if you've got a client company that's buying another company for its assets, that they're going to launch this product later on, you can mirror that in the simulated environment and build that. So you kind of help people make that bridge, make that connection very earlier on. Our sixth recommendation is going to be around appropriate technologies and modalities. So, depending on the level of participants, we talked about, again, frontline leaders all the way to C-suite, you're not going to do experiential learning the same way, right? It's about, whether it's online, whether it's face-to-face, whether it's a blend, how much time it's going to take. And it's about having that critical mass as well. So this is back to, or linked to, the culture change elements as well a little bit. Sort of, if you have different levels of audiences, you need to look at the appropriate technologies, and you need a critical mass if you're trying to change the behaviors of leaders. And then there's also the argument of whether you start from the top or the bottom. And here, I still haven't found the answers to that one. So I've seen it work different ways, whether you bottom up or top down, but you do need different modalities and a critical mass there. Okay. So I've got, let's see, a few more best practices, a few more sort of tips and tricks here for you, and then I'll open it up for questions. So the next one that I have is the time to debrief. You really need to make sure that you have enough time to debrief the team results with an expert facilitator. Again, don't just run, do the runs one after a year without that sort of thinking. Otherwise, it just becomes just a game, and there's really no benefit to that. Number 8 is going to be around lessons learned in application. So really allocating the time for the team members to capture not only the lessons learned, but how they will apply on the job. And if you do that and you build that in right there and then after the experience, if it's a face-to-face right there, or not too long after, maybe a week or a month after, but you can't let too much time pass. Okay, number 9 is going to be around no one-size-fits-all approach. So, you need to look at the organization, you need to look at the learner. The solution needs to be flexible, including from an implementation standpoint. So we know that, from the L&D, from the HR side, recently talking to somebody who has about 4 people in a team, in the L&D team for about 24,000 employees. So clearly, they don't have a lot of bandwidth, and they have to look at, the implementation. When you build that experience, you have to do something that's easily implemented. Next one is around avoiding replicating reality exactly. So really what we're trying to say here is don't try to develop a simulation that attempts to exactly replicate your business. What will happen is that the managers will be tempted to challenge the simulation, and it can become a distraction from learning. So it's really about kind of level setting everybody and just making sure that people don't come in and say, oh, I know exactly how this business works, I know exactly how this market is, and so you kind of distract from the learning. And then the last one, which is linked to this one, which is setting expectations. So explaining up front what is similar to the real world, what might be different. It's okay if the simulation is not 100% of reality. Even if you have a great simulation, it's never going to be 100% of reality, exactly like the real world. So if you explain what's the same and what's different, that's a good way. And so once you've got all these best practices, and hopefully you do all of this, then you get to what we're trying to get to, which is creating measurable impact with your teams. And so you can have a blend of the hard skills and soft skills, and then you can get them on the road to success faster by sort of condensing that experience. So I've talked a lot here over the past few minutes. I think that it's time for Q&A. Before maybe I do that, I just want to mention that if you want more information, you can download our user's guide here that has a lot more on what I've just talked about here. There's a link right there, and it's probably included in the PDF as well. So Alec, I think I'll just leave it here and see if we have any questions.
All right, Sebastian. Yeah, thank you. We have a lot of questions in the queue already, but if you have a question for Sebastian, please don't hesitate in submitting it. We'll take as many as we can as time allows. Just click on that Q&A icon on the right-hand side of your screen, type in your question, click submit. We're going to go ahead and start with one from Tom. Tom's question is, so far, this sounds like these programs are several days live and in person. How can something be done virtually?
So that's a very good question. It's actually very flexible. So you do have, I think the examples that I mentioned are sort of face-to-face. You can implement these sessions in an online format. We've seen over as long as 6 months. Probably wouldn't recommend it. Usually 2-3 weeks. And you can have, about 10 to 12 hours of content over those 2 or 3 weeks, depending. We've seen where everyone is co-located in the same offices or across different geographies, and with a mix of synchronous and asynchronous sessions as well. You can really target that and sort of facilitate that the way you want. And you can do blended as well. So you can take, sometimes you start face-to-face and you finish online, or you start online and finish face-to-face, depending. I mentioned the example of the 5-day program, a whole week times 4. That's clearly the exception to the rule in terms of the length of these sessions, for sure. I hope that answers your question.
All right. Yeah, I think so. We had a couple come in here about this exact question, or around the same idea, I should say. This one comes from Danielle or Daniel. The question is, how are you measuring the direct correlation to the impact on business results? So we had a few come in that were very similar to that.
Yeah, and so if you build in, that's a very good question. Of course, that's the age-old question of training, right? If you're able to prove to your CEO or your business partner, if you give me this, I'm gonna bring you an ROI of that. By integrating the reality and by having people work on real world elements right there and then, you really build it, in there in the program. And so if you then have, whether, again, it's during the week where you have the morning where you do the metaphor and the fictitious world, you learn about the concepts, and then in the afternoon, or you do the application to the real world, or maybe it's, back on the job for a week, and then you come back if it's an online program or something like that. That's you're able then to track, and you kind of look at the portfolio of the person, and of course you know that the training is not the only reason why sales or profitability is going to go up, hopefully up, not down. You have to sort of think about what is attributable to what. But if you build that in, that can create a very strong pull for sure.
All right, perfect. And again, we had a couple come in around the same idea as this one. How do you keep the learning going once they leave these simulations? And do you have any way or any recommendations on accountability tools?
That's a good question. There's a lot of technologies out there and a lot of things that can enable you to just go from a simple email reminder to kind of have apps on your phone that reminds you of hey, what did you learn? Or you can go the low tech approach of having you either send a postcard a month later or 3 months later or something that says you said you were going to do this. How are you doing? Can you do that? Or you can even have paper. The participants fill in their own postcard or their letter to themselves, and kind of you mail them 3 months or 2 months after. So there's no magic bullet here. It really depends on the culture and on the level. But sort of, if people identify what it is that they've learned, what it is that they can do right there and then, and if you've done a good job of making it real world, then they can apply it. And if it's, if it helps them, of course, as we know, if training is not just something added and one more thing, but if I'm going to go to this, or I'm going to spend my time here, and it's going to give me a return on my time, that can really be good. I'm not sure that answers, the question, the silver bullet, but.
We'll move along. This one's kind of in the same vein. It comes from Diana. How receptive are companies to the experiential learning, and how do you reinforce the learning between sessions, not just after?
So yeah, I mean, if you involve the managers for sure, and in between the sessions, if you have multiple sessions as well, that can be very, very strong. You can have alumni come in as well. You can also, that 20% of peer coaching as well, people that may be alumni and may have graduated from the class, from the experience, can come back and talk and also be part of the experiential. So if the team is making decisions in the simulation, they can be seen as sort of a sounding board or CEO or kind of, what do you think of that kind of thing? And I forgot the first part of the question, Alec, I'm sorry.
Let me pull it back up here.
I apologize.
Oh, no worries. If I can find it again.
I think it was about how companies, respond to these, simulations.
Yep, how receptive are companies, the first part was how receptive are companies to the experiential learning.
Yeah, I mean, I think, some companies, again, depending on the technology, depending on the business, just like, go to market, some industries, some companies are more risk adverse than others. But overall, we've seen that across different industries, B2B, B2C, healthcare, biopharma. We've seen that a lot of people are receptive, and for different audiences. For salespeople, for example, we know that sometimes coming back to headquarters for a 2-day training or what have you is kind of like, oh my God, it's going to be awful. It's going to be PowerPoint. So when you tell salespeople, hey, you're going to participate in a game, you're going to play, really that from the participants, that's very strong. So sometimes the hardest is really convincing sort of the HR sponsor, because they have to convince again their business partner on the other side of the benefit of taking people out, whether it is for 2 or 3 days or whether it is for 10 hours over 2 weeks on the online format. But once people have seen it, they really become a believer pretty fast.
All right, perfect. We're having a few come in about comparing this to gamification. What are some types of gamification exercises that you've used, if any?
Yeah, so kind of like business acumen or even leadership or experiential learning, gamification can have a lot of different things. Kind of very simple badge, and you kind of complete courses and you get a badge to ultimately to a lot of different things. The tools that we use are very competitive by nature. And a lot of times, in some of the examples I mentioned, the teams compete directly against each other. So that's, the gaming aspect. You want to make sure that it doesn't just become a game. And after, 5 or 6 or 7 rounds, it can become just a game, and people can just say, just I want to go. I want to continue just to play the game, and so the learning falls off. So you want to stop here. But there's definitely a lot of elements. If you have sort of the simulation and you create a market, fictitious market, you allow people to bring new products to market, you allow people to make some decisions and to really have the overall company and make decisions that they're probably not able to do in the real world, and sort of kind of stretch them a little bit here again. So they have, it gets them out of their sort of functional silos. So you have them do, not only the operations, you have them do, the commercial side, but you also have them do the HR, you have them do the finance and the training, and the HR, and I said that, and the IT and sort of other functions, and that really, enables them. And if you can create that ultimate simulation, that's the ultimate gamification, and that's that competitive aspect that you get ultimately.
All right, perfect. This next one's going to come from Judy. Judy's question is there an optimal length for the simulation experience?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Judy, as well. It depends a bit on the objective. It depends. In a face-to-face, I think, 2-3 days. Actually, interestingly enough, overall in the U.S., it's a shorter time frame. Our colleagues in Europe are still able to do 4 or 5 days face-to-face programs. Here in the U.S. and North America, it's more of the exception to the rule than the norm. So that's sort of what is recommended. And as I mentioned, that really sort of fits the 5, 6, 7 simulated years in the gaming, because again, if you just go more than that, it just becomes a game and you lose the learning aspect. And so on an online, that's the same idea where you can have 4 or 5 simulated years, and so that represents maybe 10 to 12 hours in an online format, where you have 3 or 4 hours a week, 3 hours a week, something like that. So you could do that over 2 or 3 weeks, and that we've seen that works quite well.
All right, we still have time for a couple more. This one's from Michelle. Michelle's just looking for a little bit of clarification. Maybe I missed it, but what was the difference between the reflect and contemplate in the cycle earlier in the presentation?
So hold on, I probably will have to go back to my notes on that one. So in the cycle, there is experience, reflect, conceptualize, and experiment. So, really simply, for me, and it's really, so the experience is you do it. So you do the learning. The reflect is what happened. You think about as a team or as an individual, you take a few minutes to say, okay, what happened? What did I do? What went well? What didn't do well? Conceptualize is the so what. If it went well, why? and if it didn't go well, why, and how is that related to a concept or to specific learning. And then the experiment is, what is it that we're going to do next time, and then you do it next time, or you do it again, and then you renew the experience, and so you do this a few times, and that's how you get to sort of that learning. There's a lot more information in the white paper that you see on the screen as well about sort of the theory behind it, so you can get a lot more there. So, but it's, for me, just to simplify behind those big words, I try to keep it simple. So it's do it, what happened, so what, and then now what? What is it that we're going to do differently next time? So hopefully that helps.
Okay, perfect. We had one just come in here from Martina. Martina's question is, other than simulations, what other experiential learning methods do you recommend for highly effective learning?
That's a good question. There's a lot of things out there. There's some team building exercises. Some of you may be familiar with the Survivor, or like you're left on the boat on a deserted island, or that kind of thing. Or you do some charity. You involve people into building bikes for kids that may need them, for example. So we've seen that work very well. We've seen as well actually having some improv groups, so comedy, kind of taking that from that aspect, especially on the softer skills, to be able to drive people. Maybe some people get out of their shells and kind of take some elements of how you do improv, how you do comedy. Stand up, that's very difficult for sure. So those are different elements. We've seen them orchestrated around those simulations, and we've seen them work well. But again, ultimately, the simulation, because you're able to take from the hard skills and the soft skills, that's probably the one that we've seen over the past 30 years work very well across the world.
All right, perfect. Well, that's going to be actually all the time we have. We still have a bunch in the queue, but we are running out of time here. So, Sebastien, thank you so much for that. Thank you to everybody who participated in today's event. Like I said, we had a ton of questions rolling in, so we appreciate your attentiveness and your participation. I also want to thank StratX for sponsoring today's webinar. It's been a pleasure working with them throughout this process. So if you enjoyed today's webinar, please take the time to fill out our post-event survey, which will appear right as this webinar ends. It's going to be a pretty short, quick survey. Your feedback is obviously very important to us, and it should help us improve our events moving forward. So thanks again to everybody on the line. We'll see you all back here for our next CLO webinar, which will take place next Thursday, Microlearning Series Part 2, Maximizing ROI with Microlearning. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great day.